Alright, so here we have an energy pyramid. Energy pyramids are useful because they show ecological relationships. Like, first of all, we have the producers down here. Now, the producers are your plants usually. They're usually photosynthetic. However, sometimes, especially at the bottom of the ocean where there is absolutely no light, some producers are chemosynthetic. So they use chemicals to make biological energy instead of light in photosynthesis. Now, the producers get eaten by a consumer. The first thing to eat a producer is called the primary consumer. The thing that eats the primary consumer is called the secondary consumer, and the thing that eats the secondary consumer is called a tertiary consumer. One of the most important things for the test for you to know here and for the EOG is that from one level to the next level, only 10% is available for the consumer. Okay. Now, that's because 90% of the producer's energy is wasted by metabolism. And then with the consumers, they have to maintain body heat, and they have to run from predators, and they have to chase food. And the secondary consumers, same thing. So 90% of the energy at each trophic level is being lost. And as a consequence of that, you have the most biomass in the producers, okay, and the most organisms in the producers. They also tend to be the smallest. Now, yes, I know trees are producers and they can be giant, but most producers are small. Primary consumers are usually small. They're insects, they're mice. Secondary consumers are usually bigger. They might be a cat or a leopard or a fox or a wolf. Well, actually, a wolf would probably be a tertiary consumer. Tertiary consumers can be small. An eagle or an owl are actually pretty big. They don't look all that big on TV, but they are, if you ever see one up close. But they have the least biomass. And that's because there's just not enough energy to support huge numbers of tertiary consumers, because you're constantly losing 90% of the energy, right? Because of body heat and hunting and all that good stuff. All right? All right, so here we have a river. It's flowing. We've got the riverbed down here. We've got the river surface up top. We've maybe got some fish of some kind swimming. Here's a little fish. He kind of looks angry. Probably looks angry because he doesn't have a lot of oxygen. The reason he doesn't have a lot of oxygen is because somewhere there was a farmer or maybe someone who really cared about their lawn, and they fertilized their lawn, and maybe they fertilized their crops. And so what happened is that fertilizer ran off of their lawn into this stream, and as a result, there we go, we got algae. Algae everywhere. This is called an algal bloom. Say it with me. Algal bloom. Okay? Now, algal blooms are not pretty. They can actually turn the water green, not just at the surface, but all throughout the water. That's not good. Sunlight's not getting to any plants down here at the bottom. You know, if there's plants down here, they're not getting sunlight because of all this algae. But what's more is eventually those extra nutrients from the fertilizer, they're going to get used up. And once they're used up, all of this algae is going to start turning, it's going to start dying. And when it dies, then it will, I can't make it black, but it's going to die. And when it dies, it's going to decompose. And the thing that does the decomposition is our old friend, bacteria. And the bacteria are going to break this down. And they're like, no problem, man. We'll break it down for you. We'll break down all this algae, and we'll get rid of it. The problem is they're going to take in oxygen out of the water. Mr. Fish here, Mr. Fish also needs oxygen. But because the algae are using up all the oxygen, fish dies. So that's how using too much fertilizer, or the wrong kind of fertilizer, on your lawn or on a field can actually lead to fish dying. So you have fertilizer, and then it gets caught up in some runoff. So real quick, if it's in runoff, is it point source pollution or non-point source pollution? Pause the video if you need to think about it. Alright, so this would be non-point pollution because, or non-point source pollution, because it's runoff. It comes from lots of different places. Alright, so fertilizer gets caught up in the runoff, runs into the lake, then you get an algal bloom. Alright, and then the algal bloom, the algae dies. Okay, algal refers to the algae. Okay, it's just, this is like saying having to do, all means having to do with algae. So algal bloom is a bloom of algae, and then the algae die, and then once the algae dies, it decomposes, and the decomposing uses up oxygen, dissolved oxygen in the water, and then the fish are at least going to be stressed. They could possibly die. This could be a problem in your fish tank too. If waste builds up in the fish tank, algae may grow like crazy, and then as the algae start dying and decomposing, there may not be enough oxygen in your fish tank. So this is not just an environmental issue, it could be an issue with your pet. Alright, see you at the next question. Alright, so we talked about a couple of different cycles. One of the most likely to be on your test and on your EOG is the nitrogen cycle. Remember, nitrogen in the atmosphere is in the form of N2, one nitrogen bonded to another nitrogen. Plants can't use that. So there's two paths that it can go through. Lightning can cause the nitrogen to break apart and bond with oxygen and form nitrates. There's also bacteria that can do it. But either way, we end up with nitrogen fixation. Alright? Now, nitrogen fixation is where nitrogen, atmospheric nitrogen, becomes nitrates. Alright? So the nitrates are then used by plants. So the plants, they grow because they're using those nitrates, and then, you know, some kind of animal comes along, maybe like a moo cow. This is going to end up looking more like a pig. They eat the grass. Eventually the pig dies and decomposes, or poos, and that decomposes. Either way, the nitrogens in the pig from the grass end up back in the soil. So they may stay as nitrates. They can actually return to the atmosphere. So what happens is bacteria, another kind of bacteria, denitrify denitrify the nitrates and form nitrogen gas. Okay? So, and that brings us back here. So nitrogen moves through living and non-living things. Bacteria play a huge role in the nitrogen cycle. There's bacteria to fix it, to make it usable to plants, and there are bacteria that change it back to atmospheric nitrogen. Okay? Another cycle we talked about is the carbon cycle. And the carbon cycle is a little more straightforward than the nitrogen cycle. So you have plants, right? And the plants take in sunlight and carbon dioxide. And they put out oxygen and H2O. Now, oh, and sugar. Now, except they don't release the sugar out into the air, they use that. Okay? Now, then you have an animal. I'm going to draw another pig because they're kind of easy to draw. Now, the pigs take in the oxygen and the H2O, and if they eat the plants, then they take in the sugar too. And they put out carbon dioxide and water. Alright, so this is basically the carbon cycle. This part of it is called photosynthesis. And this part of it with the animals taking in the oxygen and putting out the CO2 is called cellular respiration. Okay? So that's basically the carbon cycle. And the really cool thing is photosynthesis and cellular respiration are basically opposites of each other. The products of cellular respiration are the reactants of photosynthesis. So photosynthesis is carbon dioxide plus water in the presence of light produces oxygen and sugar. In cellular respiration, the sugar reacts with the oxygen to produce carbon dioxide, water, and a new chemical called ATP. ATP is an energy molecule. Cells, plant cells, animal cells, they cannot use sugar. So cellular respiration turns this chemical energy into this chemical energy over here. So that's it. And these reactants are these products. And these reactants are these products. So they're the opposites of each other. That's why they make a cycle. All right, next question. All right, remember one organism is an individual. Lots of organisms are a population. Okay, and if we start including all the other animals, okay, that's supposed to be a pig. It's kind of hard to tell. And we include all the plants and all the bacteria and all that good stuff. Now we have a community. And if we include all the rocks and the boxes and the mountains and the clouds and the air and the rainfall. Okay? Now we're talking about an ecosystem. And then if we talk about all the ecosystems, then we have a biome. And all the biomes make up the biosphere. And the biosphere that we live on is called Earth. Okay? Alright, next question. Alright, so remember, niche is your role or job, and habitat is where you live. Okay? So if habitat is your house, then your niche is your job. Okay? So your niche might be predator, and your habitat might be a forest. Your niche might be decomposer, and your habitat might be the soil. Alright, next question. Alright, ladies and gentlemen, time for another ecology review. Alright, so first of all, remember there's symbiosis, and there are three types of symbiosis. Remember, symbiosis is not always a good thing. Sometimes it's good for everybody. We call that mutualism. Sometimes it's good for one person and has no effect on the other person. We call that commensalism. And then sometimes it is good for one organism and terrible for the other. We call that parasitism. So remember, the questions on the test are going to give you a scenario. One or two sentences about two organisms, and you have to decide, is it good for both people or both organisms? Is it good for one but not, it has no effect on the other? Or is it good for one and terrible for the other? Okay? So, and you'll have to identify those. Alright, next, there are other relationships or interactions between organisms. We have predation. So this is your predator-prey. We have competition. Remember, competition is going to be two organisms in the same species or two organisms of different species competing for the same resource. The invasive species kudzu. Okay? You have a tree, and so there's my tree, and then kudzu comes along, and what it does is it's a vine, and it grows up the tree, and it eventually covers that whole tree and shades it out. So the kudzu is a better competitor for sunlight, and eventually it kills the tree. The tree can't get enough sunlight to stay alive, and it dies. So remember those. Alright, so here we have a trophic pyramid, or an energy pyramid. Pyramid.